right, yes. So secure cloud architectures. How have they been working out for you guys?
Was that directed to me, Mike?
Yes, that's your cue. This is your cue. Please say words in my direction.
So yeah, I mean, it's been a huge enabler for business for us, and also enabling our customers. Really how I kind of started and really use the construct or the architecture, which is SACA, and is based on Azure. Obviously deployed it, learned it, and it's a great fast track way of getting up an infrastructure that not only will align you to compliance to meet SCCA, which we see a lot of our customers that first sometimes they don't even know what SCCA is. They let alone VDSS and the components or the guidelines that need to be met in order for them to achieve an ATO. They just know that there's cloud, put stuff there now, right? That's what they're getting from leadership. So it's the solution itself, the template itself, the SACA template itself is, it's like a self-teaching, it's like a teaching mechanism in itself, right? So it kind of demystifies what is SCCA, and then it puts a solution in front of you that then highlights or kind of points at different parts of specifically VDSS or the virtual data center security stack, and says, this is where this is being met, this is where this is being met. And what's been awesome, really, I really took the design that Mike and the guys at Mike and whoever else was involved, who was originally involved, was it Eric Chen?
Eric helped a little bit, and we worked a lot with Microsoft, and then Bill helped. But yeah, the Kyle Hoyer, Jason Henderson at Microsoft were tremendous helps and massive advocates of it.
Yeah, and what's been awesome, I really a lot of the architecture is based around the SACA structure, which is that 3-tier architecture with having your inline tools, and there's so many different benefits to having that approach, that had a kind of sandwich approach. Now you can also do obviously the 2-tier or the 1-tier, but I can tell you a lot of the architectures I've used was really anchored in that original SACA design, and being able to kind of advertise, obviously, one, demystify, but then also advertise and show to the customer that when you do this, there's really it's an ironclad solution to more or less talk to their AO, their accreditation officer, and say, this is where this is being met, this is where this is being met, and then also say, hey, if we need to scale at each tier, that's also possible. So it's been a huge enabler, and just being able to kind of walk in and say, hey, if you want to get an instance of this up and running, here's the link to go to it. Here's some trial license, and they're kind of off to the races. Now, whether they do it or not, that's kind of up to them. You can lead a horse to water.
Have you done a lot of demos, or how many times do you think you've personally deployed the SCCA deployment using the EF5 templates?
Oh, how many times have I? Oh, I don't know. I can't count. Yeah, I always kind of revisit it, especially with the recent update to V2. But what I forgot to mention was your or F5 SACA template. That original one, I actually then rolled it and kind of built out really an identical environment in AWS, and I used a lot of the key attributes and features, and I based it off that. So I would never have even gotten off the ground if it wasn't the SACA design, the OG SACA, if you would.
Yeah. I want to be fair too and caveat that because we're talking about SACA a lot, but there is now an AWS template as well, and we are working with those guys regularly to kind of get the AWS version to the same level as the SACA version. So I don't want to totally focus 100% on Microsoft, because we will demo the SACA in Azure, but I will provide links for the AWS stuff too. But it's good to know that you're able to kind of bounce that off.
I think that's what's good about that is it was really designed to be a baseline and a starting point, right? Exactly. And to be able to take that architecture and change it to meet organization needs or even different cloud environments. There's more than just the big two out there, right? And the idea here is that we want to be able to make this easy for any cloud environment that the government wants to move into.
And we also have I guess you'll hear it here first. One of our next initiatives is a lot of the security configurations for the FRD and the STIGs for SCCA are met via AS3, And the goal right now, and one of the roadmap items, is to meet all of the requirements of VTIC 3.0 in a new AS3. So that's something that's going to be coming out soon that will give you the option. We call it, and that's one of the reasons we switch from saying SCCA or SACA or whatever we want to call it to secure cloud architectures, because we're not just, well, for us, we're focusing all on Fed, so VTIC and SCCA and things like that. But there's also the potential for other verticals to add in HIPAA and PCI and those pieces.
Absolutely, and that's absolutely a point I bring up every time sorry, if you're going to jump into the slides, I don't want to keep going on here.
No, it's all right. It'll just help us flow the conversation. One of the things I want to move along, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of input on, is a lot of times when I'm having conversations with customers, we get asked about, well, why do we care about F5? Why do we need our load balancer? Why do we need this many load balancers to manage traffic? Because a lot of times we are constantly dealing with customers not knowing that it's not just load balancing that F5 has done. I mean, we're not in the 90s anymore, and it's a lot of education that we have to do. And you have to do a lot of work to explain the amount of innovation that we've done, how much risk we can minimize with our compliance and certifications. Especially now that we're coming with a lot more mind share, that we're in all of the cloud environments, we've been part of these security architectures, and we're also not just recommending something or saying, "Hey, Mr. Customer, you're right. As long as you get enough F5s," we're saying, "Hey, do what you want, but I'm going to tell you what that best method is. And if you don't follow that, then I'm going to tell you that you didn't follow what you're recommended to do." So we're coming with very strong opinions on what works and what doesn't, based on our experience. And I assume it's been pretty similar for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Just recently we did kind of I don't want to say a bake up, more or less kind of an in-depth analysis of, native services within CSPs as opposed to maybe using F5's WAF technologies. And, though it may, certain native services within cloud providers may absolutely fit certain companies, certain organizations that have a full-time WAF team or individual that's working really close with their app owners. That's really not always the case with our customers. So we kind of did an analysis or an in-depth study of the F5's ASM and also AWAF offering, and just showing just how when you launch something in the wild or launch a new website that's publicly accessible, even in one of the gov environments, how many times you're getting hit by not only just foreign IPs, and these are application level attacks, right? But also within US IP space. So, not all threats are foreign. They also do come from local, right? And then kind of going back to the SACA design and kind of saying, this is where we're kind of covering that. So you need to take that in consideration. Yeah, sure. These services are available, right? But are you going to have someone that's full-time only doing that? So that was
so for you guys on your side of the house, you deal with a lot of different vendors and products. Why do you guys, and you specifically, feel that F5 is important in these sort of architectures? I mean, I know what I do because I'm F5 and I love it, but you're not F5. So what's your point of view?
I think it's just the malleability, or just being able to work with your traffic. I mean, the full proxy architecture is kind of just the foundational element that just drives a lot of these other values, right? And being able to get work with your traffic at a layer 7 level, and whether it be from a decryption standpoint, whether it be from a traffic steering standpoint, and then not only be able to do all of that, but then utilize something like AS3 to templatize deployments. It's very apparent when you look at F5 as opposed to other vendors that a company that was born in the racks has made such a drastic shift to being so software conscious and next, this, I don't want to call it next gen because it's not next gen, it's here, right? So the whole DevOps agile model, infrastructure as code, and you can see it so clearly in what F5 is doing with their product offering, where they don't want to be this segregated, separate system, but work with the app, work with the application. And you see it in the features and the capabilities that are released. capabilities. I mean, I think that's a huge value point, and I bring it up anytime I'm talking with customers or working with them, is that you can control your F5 and all these awesome capabilities, whether it be from a security perspective, access perspective, decryption, application delivery, all this, the same way you would control source code for the actual application itself, managed the same way in CI/CD pipeline. So it's super apparent that F5 is conscious of being around and moving with the times and moving with the IT landscape, right? So I can tell if that was one reason, or if that was multiple reasons, kind of rolled up in one. Does that
I thought it was good. Yeah. Answers my question. So the other big one that we don't spend a ton of time explaining to a lot of our customers specifically is why is secure cloud architecture important. But for anybody who doesn't live on the engineering side of the house, this is usually a big one to explain to account teams and partners and things of why not just having a template, but having a template that follows all of the requirements for secure cloud architecture is important. And personally, I think some of the biggest ones are having a design that's not an ad hoc design for every application owner, that's a standardized solution that has standardized security policies and a baseline for all applications to follow. And one of the biggest issues we run into is secure connectivity to the cloud for customers. It's one of the biggest hurdles. It's because everybody needs a secure architecture that's easy to deploy and use and sustain. And that's one of the things that I really tried to accomplish with the templates, is make it so that you really don't have to have any knowledge of F5, web application firewalls or network firewalls or any other security policies. You really just have to get an eval key, put in a password, and within 10 to 20 minutes, you're up and running with a system that you're able to start punching into and looking at security logs. But the biggest one was being able to provide an architecture that complied with all of DISTA's requirements for secure cloud computing architecture, not just the functional requirements document, but also all of the STIGs and SRGs that go with it. So having a predefined architecture that's easily automated and orchestrated, you can tie it in with any of your DevOps tools, your Ansibles and your Terraforms and your whatevers, and having it, basically an infrastructure as code solution that allows you to scale. I find a lot of customers need it. It's crucial to their success.
Yeah, absolutely. And, going back to the meeting STIG requirements, meeting this is STIGs and just compliance. I read a book a little while ago called Cybersecurity and Cyber War and What You Need to Know. And there was a great quote in there, or not even quote, it's just kind of a comparison between compliance and compliance and safety as opposed to security, and they're not synonymous, right? Compliance and safety does not mean secure, right? And he made the comparison of compliance is good for food, chemicals, drugs, stuff like that, because something like cyanide is dangerous, right? But cyanide doesn't stay up all hours of the night trying to figure out how to steal your personal identifiable information, right? That's not security. But unfortunately, there are times where we have to meet these checkboxes, and being able to get to that point in the most confident and quick, streamlined fashion is important, so we could get to the real concern, which is actual security. Security has an adversarial nature to it, that you have to be able to not only have a solution in place that is going to obviously meet these compliance, but also be able to adapt and pivot and be able to give the insight to your security, to your SOC that's needed. And going back to that previous use case, that study of launching an F5 instance with AWAF provisioned, and just watching and seeing these exploits that are being attempted. I mean, that information can be acted on. You can shift and pivot your security posture without worrying about, am I compliant? But there's so many people out there that they deploy infrastructures thinking, okay, I'm compliant, that's it, I'm good, I'm fine, move on with life, or it means we're secure. That's not the case. That's why I love this design and F5 as a product. Is it's not, okay, yeah, it gets the compliance out of the way as fast as possible, but now we can get to the real issue, which is security, right?
So one of the things I usually have to point out for customers that is often overlooked, and it's kind of led to several of the breaches that we've had not just externally with any of the CSPs, but also with a lot of the federal organizations. No, a lot is kind of strong. I won't say a lot of federal organizations, but we've had more than one system that's gone up into EC2 or gone up into Azure, gone up somewhere that there is an assumption that just because I start an application or I build an application in a GovCloud that I've covered all of my bases. And that's just not accurate, because there's still the shared responsibility model where the vendors or the CSPs, the cloud service providers, are only going to cover up to the virtualization level. And everything above that is on top of the user. You're still responsible for your patching. You're still responsible for any of your firewalling, unless you add in some form of a native service. But a big part of those native services that we run into all the time, and that's probably going to be a future podcast and training that we work on, is comparative analysis of the native services. It's just because I turn on one of the native services for firewall or for availability or whatever, just turning it on doesn't turn on those security policies. I not only have to know how to turn that system on and configure it, I now have to know how to configure all the security policies for it. I think that's one thing we really help in that, you don't have to be an expert in security to turn on ASM and have a WAF available to your enterprise. You can say, hey, this application is Apache or JBoss, or I'm running Nginx and I need to provide some level of security. Maybe I'm not an expert, but just providing something is better than nothing. And a lot of times, just because I turn on that native service, customers don't realize that they turn something on, but they still have nothing because they didn't add any configuration to it.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's a great point, because I can tell you I was never a security person in my original life as a systems engineer, and whenever I was actually a contractor on site, I obviously just kind of through osmosis in the in and out of every day, I pick up cybersecurity, I read about it and all the other stuff. I understand Expo, but from again, F5's AWAF capability, it really, even whenever I stood up and I'm watching these exploits and being able to read into them further, there's such a, there's one thing that really surprised me whenever I really started using it was, and also showing it to customers, was just a high fidelity of information that was that was not only there for whenever there was exploits kind of being thrown at you from the big bad internet, but also then using something like threat campaigns and actually tying it to ongoing live, kind of painting the current threat landscape. This isn't just, okay, it's an exploit, but now tying to this is what's happening in the wild. And there's such a verbose amount of information in there that it almost teaches the, sysadmin or engineer that may not even have a security background. So it's almost like a teaching device in itself, because there's so much information that comes with it, which is huge.
Yeah, I think, there's tons of information with all of it. I think one of the conversations that I have all the time, especially when you're looking at the security model, is just because you deploy one of these native services or you deploy your application in a cloud service provider, you're basing your analysis and your total cost of ownership on LCUs or algorithms provided by that cloud provider on what you can expect for requests per second and SSL transactions per second and things like that. A lot of times customers don't take into account, especially if they're doing public-based access, the amount of IP intelligence that they're not protecting from as far as where is traffic coming from. One of the demos that I do, and I think you do the same thing, is you deploy one of these systems, you leave it on for a little while, and you show how much traffic is coming from different countries and different states and internally, and things that you can prevent just by clicking a button. And I often reference back when I used to cover a different territory, we had a public-facing DoD website that was getting over 375,000 hits a day from Beijing and Moscow. And they were able to eliminate all of that wasted overhead just by checking a box on the big IPs that would just block the traffic. And we've had several conversations with customers where that same conversation of, hey, Mr. Domain.mil, you've got 13,000 subdomains. Have you ever evaluated how much bot traffic you're seeing? Have you evaluated where your traffic is coming from? because you're going to be paying for that traffic once you move to a cloud, because you're going to pay for the throughput and the request per second and how many ACLs that you're using, how many signatures that you're processing within those native services. So what looks like it might be, cents on the dollar now becomes 10, 20, 100 times more than what you would expect. I mean, we've had customers that have ran up in excess of $100,000 bills in under a week on some of these.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, so you hit on the requirements. So there's over 100 different functional requirements in the SCCA guidance today, and that's probably going to continue to grow as we move through. Have you done much as far as going through every single line item and helped customers with each of these different configurations?
Absolutely, yeah.
Have you?
Yeah. No, honestly, I get, vetting them and they come back, well, what about this? And they send me a screenshot of, 2.1.2.8 or something. And the great thing is, with confidence, I can point to a piece or even pieces of the SACA solution, the SACA design, to show where that is being covered. And if they need to go deeper and see it actually, in action and kind of actually, taste the, prove it, and we can do it very quickly, or they can do it themselves, which is really cool. But yeah, we've had customers that kind of break it down because they're fearful of not achieving their ATO, which, I mean, we have a track record now. I want to say we're over 20 ATOs using the SACA design.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So
I think that's more than I even realized.
Yeah. And now, mind you, it's you're again going to be demoing the ARM template for SACA, but I can tell you that the architectures that we put forward is based off of that design, whether it be in AWS, but obviously we have the template that's going to be coming out covering AWS, but it's all based off of that original SACA design. And every single time we go in there, we know with confidence that we can point to multiple places to say that this is being met here or here. And it puts the customer at ease. It puts us at ease also, because we want them to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, that was ultimately the goal, is to provide not a end product that customers click a button, boom, they're up and running, but to provide sort of a quick start and demo, boilerplate solution that they can then start adding their applications into. But I've had several emails where customers like, hey, I need instructions for every single line item, where you just reference like ASM or APM. I need to know how to configure this. And it's like, man, you have however many hundreds or thousands of applications. I don't have step-by-step instructions written out for every single one, but here's some guidance on deployment guides, or, you can work with our professional services, or, whichever partner you prefer. Sometimes I do recommend, Jonathan Spigler myself, but it's crazy that you guys have over 20 ATOs now with just the SCCA or the SACA guidance.
Yep.
And I've got links that I can provide if you don't have the AWS stuff as well, and that'll be something that we share out publicly for everybody to get access to.
Absolutely.
Talking about the high-level topology. So you've seen this, I'm sure. We're trying to avoid calling out specific virtual thresholds and things like that, and just saying, hey, this is your inspection zone. So we have our own diagrams, but we want to use these that help specify what a secure cloud computing architecture would look like. That's not VDSS and VDMS and SCCA and all of the sort of government specific, because our commercial customers and our federal or our finance customers and our healthcare customers all have the same requirements, and we don't want to scare them away, because this use case has been pretty successful for us in streamlining. Obviously, from 20 ATOs, I was only aware of a small handful of those, but our commercial customers have the same problem. We've got customers in Canada and financial verticals, and so we're trying to sort of specify what can happen within your inspection zone, or what we call the BDSS, and not call out the specific hardware. So this should be pretty familiar to you. I've seen some of your designs, and they get a little bit more complex, specific to different VNets or different VPCs and transit gateways and things between the environments. But again, this is sort of meant as a baseline for customers to say, hey, this is what we recommend. It's going to get more complex as you look at the actual transit in the environment. I think one of the things that I'll have to start adding in based on one of our conversations recently was your ability to add in layer 2 taps in design in the cloud. And that will be an interesting add in a lot of the things going forward. But yeah. I don't know if you've seen this design before. What do you think of this design?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And again, I always, when I bring up VDSS designs or the VDSS design and as far as SOC and everything, I say the architecture itself too is very, it's you can move it, push it. There's a couple key principles that you kind of keep consistent. Obviously, the inspection zone, being able to get traffic and clear text. The virtual taps. But I mean, this is hits on point. It gives a lot. It definitely gives flexibility to using kind of this. And what am I seeing here? Security VNet, availability zone. And with this, so the virtual networks in the back, so this is all contained within a single script, not necessarily security view.
For us, these terms will all change. So, the pilot and development and application too. For us, those are different mission owners that are going to be in different environments. Our security VNet is going to be our VDSS VNet, and we'll have different things that pop off of that for the VDMS and things like that. But this is pretty standard. One thing that I've found that's pretty helpful is that going to the cloud is super complex for a lot of our customers. We've got a lot of customers that have been in their position for a while and are very scared of moving to this new technology because a lot of it might seem like there's not a need for their role anymore. But in most of the cases, it's just not true. And there's just so much to learn and so much to do that it can be very complex. So we've tried to make it very simple when you're looking at what the SCCA or the SCA, the Secure Cloud Architectures, look like. And then obviously you're going to dig down deeper once you start actually designing the VPC and the connections and different availability zones and different regions and things like that.
Absolutely. And, this is going kind of even at a higher level. I always try to kind of, crawl, walk, run, or not even crawl, but more kind of twitch on the ground, shuffle on the ground, crawl, then walk or limp, walk, run. But when we get past the kind of not the just turning the screwdriver and not really thinking like, let's think higher level, let's think let's think the skyscraper instead of just a single wall. I bring in stuff like, thinking about dynamic DNS resolution with GTM, or the artist formerly known as GTM, or the DNS module, right? Especially when you're dealing with hybrid cloud environments, right? Also, doing stuff like being able to bring in stuff like Big IQ, and as you are taking a cloud approach. I mean, a lot of our customers are always terrified of cloud lock-in, and I lead with the SACA design, but then I go into other concepts. Okay, we've gotten SACA. SACA's provide us the stable ground that we can now build higher level kind of service offerings for your enterprise, right? So you bring in Big IQ, you start templatizing application deployments. And provide this kind of visibility to your app owners that they necessarily didn't have before, right? So just kind of bringing it back to what you're talking about. It's going to change. It's going to bend, flex, mold, and a lot of the services, again, native within cloud providers, they're kind of single dimension, right? Whereas I find that multi-dimensional, right?
You just reminded me too that. It's pretty public that I don't know if you saw the article that a native service was DDoS and was down for 8 hours yesterday. Yeah, if you know what I'm talking about. And I'll call them out. AWS Route 53 was down for 8 hours. Now, that's not to say that multi-factor authentication wasn't down for a full day with Azure very recently. They haven't released the reasoning there yet, but being able to DDoS your DNS service, which might seem like a very simple infrastructure service, but if DNS is down and your applications are all configured for DNS and they don't have specific IPs to communicate with each other, then there's not a lot of redundancy there, and you're kind of SOL, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't want to harp on that too much, but let's see what we got here. Yeah, so demo. You've seen this, right? You've seen SACA. You've deployed it. We're going to do it. We're going to do it. Cut that out. Yeah, we'll cut out all of your talking. We're actually going to put a voice filter to hide your identity. Yeah, we want to keep you safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the F5 Azure SACA repo, and pretty much everything is documented here in the README as far as the initial deployment requirements as well as some of the post-deployment requirements. That's not to say that every single thing you need to know after running the template is here. We actually have a specific offering from our professional services that will walk you through after you've deployed this, and maybe you're ready to start adding applications and you want some help, what needs to happen after that. So maybe you've got this deployed, you've got your baseline security policy deployed now, and you've got a firewall policy, you've got some IP intelligence deployed. Now you're ready to put your SharePoints, or you're ready to put your Nginx servers, or you're ready to start doing your multi-factor authentication with CAC or PIV, and you want to make that happen very quickly, and you don't want to do it on your own, or you want some help. We can help with that. You can obviously help with that as well. So this template right now, I have to update some of this content because we've updated some of the versioning. For example, right here you see it's 14.1.0.0.3. I've now set these templates to automatically deploy in Azure with 14.1.2, just because that's what our preferred version is for a lot of the federal requirements. You can also do 15.0, but that's going to be something that I'll recommend that you do with a different template. 15.0 brings a lot of other capabilities like the higher throughput limitations and high performance virtuals and things like that. So you can do an HPVE with AWAF and all of your threat campaigns and things. So for this demo, and feel free to jump in at any time, John, if you've got any comments to add to any of this. I'm just going to do the single tier. One thing that I will point out for anybody that is listening to this later, I don't do any of the testing in commercial clouds, so it's something that could definitely be verified. What did that just say?
Deploy at your own.
Yeah. Well, so so try to deploy these at your own risk. If there's a problem, this is community supported is really what I'm getting to. The V1 is not maintained. This is absolutely not going to work anymore. There's just too many moving parts. This was a fantastic solution, but it was very much sort of a science project. And the reason we moved to the V2, which was a completely different architecture, was that the V1 started to have too many dependencies that were changing. It was too hard to manage. So I had to start from scratch and build everything up. So for this example, we're just going to do the single tier. Pop this guy open here. And really all you have to know to be able to deploy this template is a couple of things. So I'm going to want to deploy this into a resource group in Azure. So I'm going to call this SCCA Demo 2. Really, I can leave pretty much everything default except for the DNS label prefix, and I'll get to that in a minute. Really what I'm going to do is I'm going to streamline this. I've pre-saved a configuration JSON with all of my configs here, where I set a pre-configured admin password. This one's kind of a pain in the butt because there's several requirements for the Azure portal that you have to make sure that this special character, like you don't start with an @ symbol, that you have all of the specific security requirements met. So I've got, in demos and testing, I've got a specific password that I use that's just a copy and paste over that meets all of those requirements. But all of those requirements for password complexity can be found within the Azure Resource Manager guidance. Right here, we have a declaration URL. You can't see my mouse in the recording, but I should be able to annotate. That's not let me do it. So I'll just say that there's a declaration URL field, and this is where we point to the AS3 that's going to be deployed with this solution. And this one here is pointing to a file locally. You could point this to anywhere that you've got a copy that's customized for your enterprise, your architecture. But this one is the SCCA baseline that adds a few things like IP intelligence, and it provisions things properly for you. DNS label prefix. This thing, oh, there's Bill Church. So Bill added an annotation here where I'm referring to the AS3 template. Right now, we considered making this a drop-down that let you select from a list of pre-built AS3 templates, but that doesn't let you put in custom templates, so I've stayed away from doing that. I want users to have the ability to reference their own personalized JSON for their AS3 declarations.
Yeah.
DNS label, I mean, it's kind of important, I think. So
very important.
DNS label prefix is important because this is tied to the way that Azure references different objects as far as the DNS endpoints for objects that it creates. So you want this to be unique. So a lot of times if I'm doing testing or things, I'll add a number and I can just increment that number by a 1 as I do different demo environments to stand them up if I'm not going to be deleting them right away after testing. Instance type, I have this set to default to DS3 v2. You can obviously bump this up to a beefier system if you want. If you want to run multiple things on this box, if you want to later add SSLO or do AWAF or something like that. This template automatically deploys with all of the standard best bundle modules, provision, as well as IP intelligence. So it gives you all of these standard best bundle plus IP intelligence so that you've got some protection out of the gate. And the AS3 configures those modules so that you've got some security policies that come preloaded. These license keys are pre-populated because I don't want to have to copy and paste them just for this. This was a fun one to implement as well, where you can choose whether or not to stig the device. And this came from some of our commercial teams that they love stigs and they love having a device that has a hardening baked into the initial deployment. But sometimes it makes things a little bit more complex during their deployments because they just want to be able to do things fast right away. So you can optionally change this. Now, a lot of the scripts and things that are used within these templates on the back end are within Github. So just to reference some of those, I can come back to the GitHub repository under SACA v2 and evaluate the AS3 that I'm using. So I can check the AS3 here, look at the SACA baseline. Okay, cool. I can see what an actual AS3 JSON document will look like. I can look at the scripts that do the stig for the device, which is just, in this case, a bash script that goes through and does a lot of the hardening and setting up ciphers and things like that. And then I can look at other resources in here as well. One of the things that I do in this template is I preload all of the DoD root certs, because that was just a tedious task that I've had to do so many times that if I could make it already happen for a customer, it just made it that much easier. So I've got a couple things in here just to make sure that if one of the DISA sites changes the URL or something, that it's stored locally so I don't have to reach out to that website to download it when this solution deploys. All right, if I can come back to here. So everything's already pre-populated. One thing that I definitely recommend to customers is that on the first time that this solution is run, to not change any of the subnets or the IPs in the template, just to get an idea and a feeling of how the networking is configured. We do have instances where, so this template right here, this single tier is set up only for public facing access. Our 3-tier, I've been able to add in the ability to flip between an express route versus a public connection to the environment. That's on the roadmap for this one day when I can have time to knuckle down and get it done. So you can specify your own IP space using the express route based template, but this one, just deploy it with the pre-built IP configuration just to get an idea. And then once you know how everything works, then you can feel more comfortable coming through and changing these based off of your requirements. But honestly, none of these IPs for North Trusted or North Untrusted, none of this is going to be accessible from the internet. All of this is going to be behind an Azure load balancer, and there's going to be some NAT happening to protect the stuff. And there's NSGs or network security groups and F5 policies to protect the environment. And then the only other thing that I would often recommend is if you're deploying this, make sure you configure the restricted source address. This is going to be the initial security applied to the network security group. So you don't want to have this wide open to the internet. If you do, some bad things will happen. There's several attacks that start flooding into your system on your management or on your tunnel management interfaces that you should just start blocking right away, because the CSP address spaces for public IPs are very well known. So as soon as something comes live in that IP block, you start getting a lot of so for the Microsoft example, for Azure, you start getting a lot of SQL injections and RDP injection type attacks to try and penetrate those systems. So for this, I'm just going to say, I agree to all these terms. Everything is good here. I've really got nothing to protect against. I'm happy with this, and I'm going to purchase. And if the cloud service provider gods are happy with me today, everything goes through smoothly. If the internet at Bill's house is solid, then everything will go through.
It's fine. Everything's fine.
Everything's fine. And it's going to submit the deployment. So deployment in progress, here we go. And then you can sit here and you can watch this full system deploy. Depending on the time of day, the amount of traffic, if there's backups and things happening within Azure, this will generally take 7 to 15 minutes to deploy, which is pretty significant when you look at what's actually happening on the back end. You've got, in this use case, a pair of big IPs in an HA pair with all of the modules provisioned and licensed and configured to start providing some protection to your environment. So that's that. I'll probably cover later on in the video portion some of the results that you get from leaving the system online overnight, some of the scan results and attacks that come in. But that's the demo. Everything's said and done, you'll have an environment that's happy and running. And just to give an example of what this looks like. I get my full network diagram.
Cool.
Jonathan, this stuff all probably looks pretty normal to you, right?
Pretty normal. Pretty awesome.
Back to this, you've already seen it. One of the things that's been pretty fantastic for us is the investment from Microsoft. I mean, I don't want to give them all the credit. They deserve most of the credit. But we are getting some things moving with AWS now. So I'm working with those guys on a weekly basis. And we've got some other architects that are working with those guys on the AWS side on a regular basis to get us to the same level where we are with Microsoft. But the guys over at Microsoft, Jason Henderson, Cobbler, have put in a ton of effort. We've done a joint podcast with those guys. Jason recently did a podcast with Steve Michelotti on the SCCA or SACA solution. So there's some links that I can share out that people can access those and check it out. Once we have things for all of the AWS resources, we'll start posting those as well. They're going to be putting in the same level of effort for videos and podcasts and articles as well on their websites. And I think that's almost it, aside from some links to the resources. And I'll provide these for people to be able to click. That's not in video form. One of the things that I'm working on is separating out all of the AS3 configurations into its own repository. Right now, these are over in my personal GitHub, but the plan is for those to move over to the F5 Dev Central repositories once we can get some things cleared up. But one of the things I'm working on is creating what I'm calling the Secure Cloud DO, which is declarative onboarding, which, if you're not familiar, is the layer 1 through 4 configuration objects for Big IP that you get basically a declarative API to provision all of your resources very quickly. And then the AS3 Secure Cloud configurations, which are all of your 5 through 7 application declarative API configuration objects. The F5 Azure SACA templates, obviously we went through. And then you can see here in the Michael O'Leary, he's got the F5 SCA security stack, which is the AWS release of the SCCA architecture. And that's it, man. What did I forget? What did I miss? What do I got? What do you got? What do we got?
Only last thing I can think of, that it seems like there's starting to become definitely a groundswell or just this huge movement. We're seeing it within the Navy right now, and that is the adoption of container orchestration environments, container workloads. A big shift is happening, and this is just another kind of going back to F5 and the kind of multi-dimensionalism of the platform, and being able to work with your application regardless of how it's being deployed, and using it. You can use the same SACA architecture and not build yourself into a corner or architect yourself into a corner, especially when you start making a shift, you being the customer, start making a shift to cloud native apps or cloud or container-based apps. Really cool integration that sockets can also back into and be integrated into. We're actually working with a couple customers on that right now. Still using this kind of foundational starting place. So I just want to mention that because that does come up a lot, and I forgot to mention that earlier in the presentation, but it comes up, well, we're looking to start adopting something like OpenShift or Kubernetes. It's like, well, it's like this can accommodate to that. So that was the last thing I have. Cool.
All right, man. Well, hopefully we've had a discussion that's helpful to somebody. I guess we'll find out. I mean, cool.